So hello and welcome to another episode of the ICC Academy Livecast, a new podcast series where we take a deeper dive into global business trends and ideas. I'm your host Thomas Paris, and in this episode, we will take a closer look at the online payment marketplace and the SME digital transformation. Our special guest today is Gerald Sun, Vice President of Government Engagement at Mastercard APAC. So thank you so much for joining us, Gerald. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you very much for the invitation. This is a topic close at heart and, extremely privileged and happy to be here.
So thanks again. So before we get started, to help our audience understand a little bit more about who you are, maybe it would be a good idea just to dive a little bit into your background and what it is that you do at Mastercard.
Well, I head up government engagement at Mastercard in Asia, and that's a fancy term for actually saying that I'm the point of the organization that actually helps governments in their efforts to improve quality of life and economic development. And what we do is co-create with them and co-develop with them solutions that will help push the needles on these two things, and in a manner that aunties up both our capabilities as well as those of our partners.
Fantastic. So if we can just get started on the first question I have here, which is finding ways to digitize SMEs has been an important and popular discussion point on the international stage, on the ICC side certainly, and I think that's certainly one of the reasons why it brought both ICC and Mastercard together. So why, in your opinion, why is it important for SMEs to digitize?
Well, there's a very simple macro reason for this. I think everybody on the call and innately around us understand how important SMEs are to the economy. They drive a significant portion or majority portion of the GDP, and very often in most countries actually are responsible to 70 or more % of the employment in any country around the world. Hence, they're extremely important to make sure that we continue to support and ensure the growth and competitiveness of. On a macro reason and how this is connected with digital and trade is that there is a lot of evidence that shows that if you can increase SME trade activity, be it those domestic or cross-border trade, there is a knock-on effect and a subsequent increase in GDP and more importantly in employment. So that's why this is critical because, working on SME enablement, giving them digital capabilities is also about ensuring future employment within a country.
Right. What would happen for the SMEs that don't?
Well, that's a brilliant question because we often encounter businesses who are very comfortable where they are and they just go, I've been around for a long time, my customers, just show up and keep coming. I don't understand why I need to invest in going digital, and I don't understand what the fuss is about. Well, it actually is an issue of, not doing it is, could be lethal to an SME, right? Especially if you're in manufacturing or services, because not taking advantage of digital technologies would eventually translate into being less price competitive, having lower access to markets, lower access to financing, and collectively all these aspects will lead to lower chance of commercial success. And hence, if you extrapolate this and build this up over time, where most of your competitors are investing in digital services and are more price competitive and have access to more customers, this just makes the future of your business, which is non-digital, much more difficult business to be in.
Right. So there is a problem here, and to what extent? So there have been lots of studies been done, one of them by the Asian Development Bank. The ICC has also been involved in researching this topic. But to what extent are the SMEs underserved in trade, and in particular trade financing today? Well,
their SMEs are heavily underserved across the board, right? So let's just, establish that baseline. And versus big corporations, right? This has got to do with, economies of scale, and also how SMEs are funded. And as an example, if you were a baker, you'd be very good at baking, but you might not be such a good accountant or a lawyer, right? So they're poorly served when it comes to shared services. And because of their scale, because they're small, they don't buy a lot. They often pay a high price versus large companies. But conversely, for large companies, they're also very costly to serve. And so if we go beyond shared service and we talk specifically about trade, there are a whole sequence of events that have to happen to get goods from point A to point B, right? Customs permits, loading and unloading, the transshipment, all the paperwork that follows it. Many of these costs are embedded and do not fluctuate even if you have larger quantity, or they stay fairly stable. A permit is a permit. So what happens is that SMEs having a smaller trade quantum bear a very heavy burden and very high overhead for transacting in small quantities. What this results in is that many big businesses don't want to deal directly with SMEs and instead go through middlemen, wholesalers, distributors, as commonly known. And this adds a layer of cost for SMEs and also disintermediates them from their marketplaces and prevents them from doing direct business from the buyers and sellers. And hence, this has an impact on their competitiveness. Yeah. And when it comes to trade financing, it's important to also think about the impediments that actually banks serve, right? So just picking up on your point on the study by ADB and some of the agencies, it's estimated that 70 to 80% of loan rejections on trade financing are actually made to SMEs, right? So out of 100 loan rejections, SMEs account for the majority of them. And when we peel the onion and look at all the reasons why this is the case, a lot of it is due to the cost involved in servicing a small ticket size, and also the difficulties in assembling the documentation needed to support a trade application, right? So banks struggle on both fronts, and what this translates to is it costs a bank somewhere around $2,000 to $3,000 to administer a trade loan. Now, we also know from the SME side that you don't deal in trade transactions in millions of dollars. Typically, if you're a small SME, you deal in $20,000 to $50,000 trade sizes. That cost to get involved in lending means to the bank a high cost and very low profitability, or even negative profitability, or taking on the SME loan at this quantum. And conversely, for the SME, it means very high administrative costs that they have to pay to get what's a relatively small loan. And hence, this is an area that SMEs have been, I wouldn't even say underserved, excluded is probably, a better description of SMEs in global trade financing.
Right. So what does this inclusion mean for SMEs?
Well, inclusion means being able to play like the big boys, right? And what does playing like the big boys mean? It means actually being able to access directly your buyers and sellers without being disintermediated by a bunch of middlemen, being able to say, hey, this is what I want for this price, and being able to fulfill the trade transaction across borders if you need to. So some progress has been made on the SME front to do this, and it's no secret. I think the world's well acquainted with Jack Ma and Alibaba. Such proprietary trade platforms like Alibaba and quite a number of others have become increasingly popular. And there's a basic reason for this, right? They've done a really good job in matching supply and demand, and providing some price discovery for the buyers as well. So, in a sense, shopping without actually leaving your seat. That said, these marketplaces have been much less successful in making trade fulfillment electronic or digital. And that's a big term, so I'll explain it. Like, it's easy enough to go online and say I want to buy 10,000 widgets or a million bolts as an SME. And once you've had the agreement that I'm going to pay X dollars for this, you often are then left to handle your fulfillment of the transaction offline, right? You have to call your banker, you got to call your insurance company, you got to call a logistics company offline to manage all these things that will actually make and fulfill the trade, right? To get the goods to where you need them. And that's where a lot of work still needs to be done. And in contrast, and this is an important contrast, consumers are very used to, and you and I are used to shopping online in a B2C context. And so if you go to Amazon, eBay, or a host of Chinese websites like Taobao, and so on and so forth in all countries, one party is able to present inventory, present pricing, support the payment, fulfillment in terms of delivery and logistics, and in many cases financing as well. So it easily comes under one house, but for SMEs, this continues to be elusive.
What are the benefits of an SME adopting digital capabilities and entering the online marketplace?
Well, the benefits of a online marketplace, first of all, are very similar to the benefits of a marketplace, right? People go to a marketplace because it's a convening of buyers and sellers. And that's been the case for thousands of years. The revolution that the internet brought, in terms of having a marketplace online, is now geography is no longer a constraint to the convening of marketplaces, right? You don't all have to fly to one location to peddle your wares. You can actually do it from your office and from your factory and still be able to access your buyers and your sellers. So that's the big revolution in terms of participating in an online marketplace. By definition, because something is online and digital, it would stand to reason that their participants should also be online and digital in order to take most advantage of an online marketplace. And let me explain that a little bit by sharing an example of how online marketplaces evolved. And maybe an easy one, again, is to allude to the consumer online marketplace, where in the early days of online travel marketplaces, you would go online and submit a travel request, and it would seem like you made a booking, but actually in the background, a web form was created, and an email was sent to somebody, and somebody actually did a lot of manual booking and reservations work and came back to you, right? Or populated it. So there were a bunch of mice doing a lot of manual handling in the back that made a platform seem digital. Now that may be okay from a user experience, right? If you can do it fairly rapidly, but it's definitely not great in terms of the cost to serve, right? And it's definitely not a good model to scale up your business, because you would essentially need to say every 10 transactions I get within the hour, I need one person. So if I have 100 transactions, I need 100 people, and you would never get the price break of scaling up digitally. Whereas in a company where digital infrastructure is invested in to fulfill a transaction or to respond to a customer, you do a build one time. And then the computers do the rest of the work, right? These bots or these computers are actually, after the one-time investment, up 24/7, handling customer service, managing the order and the fulfillment. There might still be some human touch, but it's definitely a lot more scalable, right?
Right.
And you don't have, issues like time zones and issues like your staff not being in when customers in another region are waking up and wanting to buy from you. Those issues are less complex to address if you go digital.
Okay. So the SMEs need to step up, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah. So what are the best ways that a small business can equip themselves in 2019?
Well, digital equipping or SMEs going digital has been a sort of big buzzword, right? Other associated buzzwords we hear about is the increasing digital divide, and we've explained why the digital divide is a problem in terms of SME competitiveness with big business. But while the rallying call on going digital is simple, it's also sometimes extremely hard to visualize for SMEs, right? How do I exactly go digital? What does going digital mean? Does it mean my staff are digital? Is HR digital? Is payroll digital? Is accounting digital? Is inventory digital? Is ordering digital? It is all of those, right? Or it could be one of those, right? It really depends on the business. What we recommend for most businesses is actually to start in a small area and understand that it's actually a transformative process and also an iterative process, right? You're not going to go digital once. You're going to migrate some process to digital or migrate certain platform to digital. And then based on that experience, right, build on it, right? And I'll use the example of e-invoice, right? And the reason why we kind of settled and like e-invoice as an industry, it's because invoicing touches almost all businesses. If you buy and sell, you either send or receive invoices, right? And why is that? If you start with something small like e-invoice, everybody understands it, right? They can see and understand the immediate benefits. But you also give your organization and your staff time to embed and familiarize them with e-invoicing and the knock-on implications of that. It also gives time for your customers and your trading partners to adapt to the digital device that you're deploying, e-invoice. And if you handle this successfully within an organization, big or small, at a certain point in time, we see either customers, employees, or both actually complaining or asking for more digitization, right? And I'll give you an example. If you send a customer an e-invoice and say, we've delivered a service, you owe us $200. And and then your next request of them is to come to your office and pay in cash or send you a check for $200. It's a little bit misaligned and out of sync.
Yes.
The expectation from the customer would be, how can I also pay you?
Right. It can't just be half the equation.
Exactly. But what's really the implication, and why I'm making this implication process as a journey, is that when you think about the customer paying you, you've just actually eliminated the need to hand deliver an invoice, and also eliminated a need to then follow up and have the customer hand you a payment back or collect it over the mail, right? So a lot of the knock-on effects and cost savings will accrue and be absorbed over time. And actually, once you kick off the process, it's like a snowball.
Right.
It'll begin to build, start small, keep at it, keep iterating. And before you know it, it'll have a life of its own, like everything else.
So invoicing would be a good place to start.
Absolutely. Right. That's the baseline across most companies.
Okay. And then one tool that I want to touch on is the EBPP, which is the Electronic Bill Presentment and Payment, which has been described as essentially a small investment for a big impact. What could you tell us a little bit about this?
Well, EBPP. Firstly, it's really a fancy term for sending someone an electronic invoice and having them accept it to say, I accept this invoice, please deliver me the goods and service. Right? There is immediately an efficiency aspect to it. I think we've touched on some of the efficiency aspects. The first thing is that you don't have to mail or physically deliver an invoice to someone, and you're leveraging email, for example, which is pretty much a sunk cost. There's no additional cost in sending out the invoice to a customer, right? So you can route it quite efficiently. You don't have to worry about the boss being in the company, because often nowadays we access our emails everywhere, right? So it's a very efficient delivery mechanism. But what's also more efficient is then what happens after the customer receives the invoice, right? If you have to follow up, if they have to pay against it, if you have to rework the invoice, how do you reconcile the invoice against payment? And how do you do your bank reconciliation? So on and so forth. All these knock-on activities, if you start digital, sets you up very well for making everything digital, and sets up a very nice improvement in efficiency conversation, right? In terms of managing what is essentially billing, right? For most companies. And again, if I draw the parallel to consumer activity, so that people understand this, is actually looking at cashiers in the retail environment, right? A lot of us love to shop. We like to go to a shop to get something. We want to go to a shop to experience something. And then we pick up something. And then we have to go to a cashier. Well, the cashier doesn't exist for the pleasure of the buyer or the seller, but it's a necessary evil, right? Otherwise, you can't have an exchange of goods. Somebody needs to collect money. Invoicing is one of the processes in the consumer cashier activity. There are a few more, but that example underscores the kind of frictions that are existence in today in an analog world for a consumer, right? And in the same way that retailers are thinking of, if we can identify you through your phone or through a chip or through your watch or something that you're wearing, can we not then just account for stuff that you put in your cart on the way and just automatically bill your account at the end of it when you leave, right? So that's the holy grail in terms of consumer retail,
right?
And in the same way, that's a good analogy in terms of what businesses want to achieve, which is simply, I've done my service obligation to you as agreed in the contract. I'm sending you an invoice. I don't want to chase you for the invoice. I don't want to worry about whether you paid me the right amount and whether this check was for 3 invoices over 6 months and you were missing 1 invoice, and then whether or not what you said you paid me actually corresponded to what was the amount I got in my bank account or the check bounced, etc. Right? All that stuff actually adds overhead and is part of the cashier process, which has always been a necessary evil, but now we actually have the tools to eliminate this friction process, which neither the buyer or the seller enjoy.
Right. No, I mean that's fantastic. So in addition to the operational efficiency side, what would you say are the other benefits that go along with e-invoicing?
Well, that's a good question. I think there is a lot to be achieved in terms of operational efficiency from starting with e-invoice and then reviewing the rest of the financial processes around invoicing. And figuring out how to automate them so that they can be a straight-through process. But also because you have a structured electronic document and evidence of your trade, in most environments, this is very good legal evidence, right? In case there's a dispute. And there's a very clear trail as well for a company and business to understand what has transpired in correspondence and been presented to a customer. The other thing with the electronic invoice, it gives tremendous visibility for either the buyer or seller to understand the trade activity that is happening, right? It's very easy to go to your electronic invoices and figure out how much you've sold. But if you ask your receivables clerk and they have to process invoices, they have to actually sit down and manually go through invoices, right? Or someone would have had to do it, key it into Excel in order to get the answer rapidly. So going to e-invoice actually eliminates all those inefficiencies. And also gives you that legal support in the event you have a dispute. But lastly, and most importantly, so there are a bunch of other knock-on benefits, but I'll focus on what we're really trying to work on, is that e-invoicing ultimately will unlock financing for small and medium-sized enterprises, right? And that's a big statement, so I'll kind of explain. In the world that we live in today, bankers and financial providers find it very easy or much easier to give loans to big businesses because they're audited, they're listed, many things are public and transparent, right? Conversely, when you speak to these organizations about giving loans to SMEs, they're continually being challenged by the validity of the books and the accounts that they're being presented by SMEs, right? And I am not necessarily referring to it being a fraudulent process, but even just how the SMEs are representing their information is hard for the banks to process and digest, right? It's not electronic. It's not in the same structured form as big business, etc. So this adds to the uncertainty, the overhead, and the risk that banks have to bear. If SMEs start engaging in e-invoicing, and in many markets there are registries on e-invoicing, this builds a history. More importantly, this builds a trade history. And at a certain point in time, and although we're not there yet in many markets, but we've already seen it in some markets, financiers, both banks and fintech companies, are able to look at that trade history from the invoice trail evidence and say, hey, if this company's done 1,000 invoices the last year of this quantum, maybe it's reasonable to actually provide them a loan for a similar quantum for their next trade transaction, right? And so that's really the premise of how this is going to unlock financing for SMEs, without the big scary stuff of saying, I need to spend $1 million to invest in ERP so I get to the kind of financial reporting standards of big business, right? So this could be actually a quick and dirty and zero effort way for SMEs to create that bankable and financeable history for themselves.
And if we take a look at the overall timeline of what you're describing, where would you say that we are today when it comes to what the SMEs can do? When it comes to also, you mentioned the registry. What sort of horizon are we looking at? Something in the next 5 years, or something in the next 10 years?
Well, it's a combination of now and tomorrow, and what I mean about that is that we are living in a world where markets, countries, and SMEs are on different states of development, right? So we don't have broad-based adoption, right? That's where we are today. But yet, if we start looking at SMEs, we have a lot of startups that are .coms that are born digital, right? Entrepreneurs out of university, skipping university, who cannot imagine doing traditional manual bookkeeping entries and start straight by going digital, right? So they avoid all the documentary credibility issues of traditional small business. Then we have businesses that have been, around for decades, across 3 generations, have been, going concerns and have a big base of customers, and they have a different problem. Their issue is how do they move from analog to digital, right? So that's the problem we have to solve in the target market space. There are also issues that we have to solve in the availability of platforms that are actually targeted at SMEs and actually built for SMEs, right? And what I mean by that is most big business, traditionally, if you take auto manufacturers, they had ways to exchange information and data that required essentially participants and platform guys to stand up a team of IT people, spend $100,000 and work on it for weeks, right? This is not a great model for onboarding SMEs, obviously, right? So we need platforms to be, SME capable, not just in terms of a directory listing, but looking at all the trade services that they require to support a trade, right? So that's the thing. Thirdly, we then need to have the right international policy, legal framework, and standards to actually support all this activity, right? So I'll use the example of container shipping, right? If the world didn't have container shipping, we would have very odd-sized trucks and challenges loading cargo and odd-sized ships, and the problem goes on, right? So in the world with a lack of very common main standards, like if you look at invoicing, there are like 500 different e-invoicing standards around. It makes it extremely costly for SMEs to interface, right? It's crazy. Asking an SME to interface with 500 invoice standards is like saying you got to quote your inventory in 500 or 200 different currencies. Right. It's a nightmare to manage, right? So there has got to be some global consensus about making this easy, making the connectivity easy, standardizing a lot of this stuff, and also providing the right the assurance framework, right? Legal and liability stuff, so on and so forth. Right? So where are we on this journey? I'm actually quite pleased to say that we've started across the board, right? Both in terms of governments, NGOs, and commercial companies all trying to solve this, right? And also what's most encouraging in the last 2 or 3 years is that there has been a big understanding that this can only be solved in a very effective and efficient manner if everybody comes together and works at it collectively. And so a lot of that activity is happening. I know ICC is taking the lead in doing a lot of this work. And it is going to be a journey. But SMEs, I think the main point is SMEs don't have to wait to either digitize or go on online marketplaces. Right. They're there now, but what will happen with all these devices being unlocked by governments and by platforms is that their journey is going to be more and more productive. They will have access to more markets. There will be less friction, and they'll have more tools to actually enable them to go cheaper, better, faster, and be more friendly to their customers. Right. So that's really what's going to happen. And from a customer user experience perspective, the cumulative efforts that are going on, hopefully within the next 5 to 10 years, is going to make the B2B or SME online experience feel and look a lot more like Amazon and a lot less like Yellow Pages Online and doing everything manually in the background. So that's where we're heading. It's tough stuff, just because it's like, getting everybody in the room from across the world to agree on some commonalities. Right. But the most difficult stuff has been done, in the sense that everybody agrees that it's a pressing problem to be solved, and everybody wants it to be solved ASAP.
Right. And then there also is the other, there's a two-pronged approach, one of them being the actual SME, and the other one are the expectations from the customers. At a certain point, they are going to have to adapt to be sustainable, to actually continue existing, because otherwise the new generation of clientele will be expecting this.
Yeah. And, I couldn't agree with you more. A good example of this is in the old days, as a customer, if you wrote into a company, you'd be quite happy if you got a response in 2 weeks by mail, and you go, oh, the company loves me. But now the customer expectation has actually changed, right? Mm. When you send an email, you don't care if the boss is on holiday. You're kind of expecting a response at best in the next 3 days, right? So that's why digital has become a must-do, and interconnecting digital platforms have become extremely important in this new world, where consumers have actually much higher demands, and our demands in our consumer purchasing and B2C interaction spheres eventually trickle down to our demands in B2B as well. Right. So right now, at least the demand and the bars have been set and they're agreed on, and everybody is trying to actually work towards that common goal. And I would encourage all SMEs to think about where they are on this journey and how to get on this journey. Unlike 5 or 10 years ago, having a digital financial infrastructure is not something esoteric or alien anymore. I think you just need to look at your neighboring companies and people in your trade association. And there are a bunch of people who have really transformed and gone digital. And they serve as great examples of peers that can give you support on your journey, and help you with their learnings as well. Right.
Right. And just another illustration of this kind of industry collaboration, and also to learn from other best case scenarios is the project that we're working on. So the ICC Academy is also, we'll be sharing a little bit more information soon, but we are developing an online course together with Mastercard and Basware and Xero. So we'll have a little bit more information to announce in the next few weeks, but that is going to be focusing on getting SMEs ready on the e-invoicing side. And I think that's going to be providing a bunch of information and more specifically tools for individuals to get started and understand what it is that they can expect from actually putting in this effort for the future.
Yes, we're extremely excited and privileged to be a partner with ICC on this journey to help SMEs go digitally more easily. I think what's great about this course I'm kind of tooting my horn here, but or our collective horn. But I think what's great about this course is that it's not really technically focused. It's quite practically oriented. We're looking at case studies and really giving practical advice in terms of how to manage the journey internally, right? We do target and focus on the key issues SMEs have on going digital, and time again, we've been reminded that unlike big business, SMEs don't have the ability to integrate digital solutions, and so they're often left with a nice digital solution that doesn't connect with the rest of their processes, which are offline. And so we're starting a collaboration with the industry, with ICC, and hoping to pick up steam, with other bodies in the government to try to figure out, both from a platform basis, but also from a know-how basis, right? Because the tools are only as good as the people who are using the tools, right? The effectiveness of the tools, to be able to run this in tandem and in a complementary manner. So this is very exciting for us. It's a good start. It's a learning journey for us, and we're really looking forward to the results, the inputs, the feedback, and the interaction with the community at large.
Yeah. No, we're very excited as well. So keep your eyes peeled for the press release that'll be coming on in a few weeks. Thanks again, Gerald. If you have one thing that you would like the audience to take away from this conversation, what do you think it would be?
Well, I think almost everybody has heard the mantra "Go digital" and you run a big business and a better business. The main reason, outside of financing and everything else, is why has a small business owner actually gone into business in the first place, right? And for most of us, and I run a small business on the side, for most of us, we went into it because of a belief, right? We believe we could bake the best muffins. We believe that we would love customer interaction. We would make great lawyers, et cetera, et cetera. And then we started businesses and we realized, oh my goodness, we're doing a lot of accounting. We're doing a lot of legal work. We're doing a lot of paperwork. And, at a personal level, what digitization offers the opportunity for an SME is really to say, hey, this is going to be able to take away a lot of this grunt work that I do today, which includes, for example, doing invoice matching on my bedroom floor at the end of the year before the taxman comes at me, right? This should remove all these annoying things that actually stand in the way of me spending more time doing the things I love, expanding my business, meeting with my customers, coming up with new flavors of cupcakes, right? All that stuff is what drives us as small business owners, right? We started the business to become aspirational, to grow, to deliver greater delight to our customers. Many of these business operating activities are must-dos, but don't give us any happiness or value. And that's the biggest benefit of digital, right? Unlocking the key, if you do it well, to get you away from the grind of stuff you don't like to do and focus you on the stuff you want to do in your digital business. And that's the principal reason to get digital. I mean, yes, it will unlock financing. Yes, it will give you access to markets and so on and so forth. But most importantly, if you do it correctly, it should transform and give you leverage to do more of what you love, more of what you think is important with your business, versus being caught up with the grind of the daily activity of administering your business and running a lot of manual processes that unfortunately you have to deal with as a business owner, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what I have for my thought. Last thought: go digital because it takes you closer to why you started in the first place.
Well, thanks for that. It's very inspiring. So unfortunately, we do have to start wrapping up. So once again, thank you so much for coming in, Gerald. This was a lot of fun. I think we all learned a lot. And as a reminder, we are hosting live broadcasts every month. So sign up to our website for free and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of the ICC Livecast. See you next time.
See you next time. Thank you.